Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praises are Allah's, Lord of the worlds, and may His peace and blessings be upon our Master, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and his pure immaculate Ahlul Bayt. Allah. There was just one final bit last night which I wasn't able to finish, and it was one ethical point and one irfani point in relation to the story of the cow in verses 67 to 71 in Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Holy Quran. Because there too, in two clans of Bani Israel, there was some disunity. Someone was killed in one clan, and then they wanted to know who it was. They accused the other clan. They went to Prophet Musa alayhi salam as a judge, and you all know the story that Prophet Musa alayhi salam told them to bring a cow. That cow has to be sacrificed, and a part of that slaughtered, then a part of the cow, on tapping the dead body of the person who's just been killed, that body will be revived again, and then he'll say who the killer was. That's another example of, returning to life after being dead, and another example again where the body was intact. It wasn't decomposed or so on and so forth. But one ethical point and one irfani point here. I'll just quickly go through the actual verses in English. And when Moses said to his people, "Indeed Allah commands you to slaughter a cow," they said, "Do you take us in derision?" He said, "I seek Allah's protection, lest I should be one of the senseless." They said, "Invoke your Lord for us, that He may clarify for us what she may be." He said, Allah says, "She is a cow, neither old nor young." This is important for later, these descriptions. "Neither old nor young, of a middle age. Now do what you are commanded." They said, "Invoke your Lord for us, that He may clarify for us what her colour may be." He said, Allah says, "She is a cow that is yellow, of a bright hue, pleasing to the onlookers." They said, "Invoke your Lord for us, that He may clarify for us what she may be. Indeed, all cows are much alike to us, and if Allah wishes, we will surely be guided." Then he said, that Allah says, "She is a cow not broken to till the earth or to water the tillage," the vegetation, "sound and without blemish." That was the verses which are speaking that in relation to part of the story. Now, what the ethicists usually speak of in relation to this story is that one of the youth of Bani Israel who was working in the marketplace wanted to buy something, a piece of merchandise, which would be very important for him in relation to his business. And so he said to the merchant, "Just stay here, I'll just go and get the money, and then I'll be back as soon as possible." So he ran off to his house to get the money from the safe, and his father was sleeping in a manner that the father's legs were acting as a barrier to the person from the safe. The feet were in front of the safe, so in order to open the safe, he had to wake up his father. That was the problem. And out of etiquette, out of adab, so that he doesn't wake up his father, He said, okay, forget it. I don't need that piece of merchandise or that piece of goods. I can do without it. I don't want to bother my father though. So he went back, and the mother related to the father when he woke up what had happened, and then the father praised his son and gave him a cow as a present and said, may this cow be a source of abundance to you. Now, so he now has a cow. When Bani Israel, that clan, was searching for the cow with those descriptions that Musa alayhi salam had asked for, so that they can revive the dead, here, with all those descriptions, it ended up being the same cow that the father had given his son. So at the end they found the cow belonging to that young boy or young man, and they said, we need this cow, it's very important. And he said, he kept on giving the price. They said, this is too much. They went, the next day they came, said, okay, well, I accept it. By the next day he said, he increased another 200 units of whatever the money was then. And then they said, it's too much. You said, you know, it's 1,000 yesterday, now you're saying 1,200. He said, well, that's the price today. So they went back, they said, it's okay, buy it. This kept on continuing. And then the man decided not even to sell the cow. He said, no, I don't even want to sell it. Until the members of the clan said, we'll pay you the weight of the cow in gold. And then the man said, okay. And that was that source of abundance that he received only because of observing the etiquette towards one's father. Now, the children here, or the youth who are here in America, this is something which, living in America may have many good aspects to it. No one's denying that. And it's very unhealthy to negate all things in America as being bad. But there are some good aspects here. But one bad aspect which we see in America, and in the West in general, but especially here, is the lack of respect children give to their parents. And this is something that you have to make sure you don't learn. This part of the American culture, you have to make sure, you have to put aside. Islam's stance is very evident. You may not like it. I mean, you're going to be a father one day too. You may not like it, but the respect to one's parents, in this case the father, but the mother even more so. But now we're speaking about the father, I'll just speak about the father for now. It's absolute, or almost absolute. Even if they tell you to do things against your religion, you should just, divert the issue very politely. You can't sin if your parents tell you to sin. But still, even then, you shouldn't shout or reject what they're saying in a negative way. You can't make them angry. This is Islam. You can't disappoint them. Even if it's their fault. Even if it's their fault. That's nothing to do with you. You just think about your own duty. Your father will then have to think about his own actions. But there's no need for you to worry about his actions. You just think about yourself. And this is very difficult. But the key to salvation, to the degree that you obey your father, to the degree that you don't cause him any harm, that will be your degree of success in life. Sometimes he may even do things which are very bad to you. But you be patient with him. He's your father. She's your mother. Be patient. Your salvation lies in that. There are exceptions, but I don't want to enter those exceptions now. But this is Islam's stance. And there's no compromising with it. No one will achieve 100% success in it. Not me, not you. It's okay. But do your best, because your salvation lies in it. Now the irfani point in this story, because you know all stories in the Quran have esoteric layers to it. If you look at the stories, core stories, well, that will be a weakness of the Quran now, because our books of history which explain these stories much better than the Quran does. So you can't just focus on the story as a story. That would be a pity. You have to sort of open those inner layers to these stories. Usually all stories of the Holy Quran, the ultimate message is or involves how to slaughter one's ego. All of them. For example, Ibrahim's story of the 4 birds, Moses' mountain episode, Saul's armies passing by the river, the cutting of the hands of the wives of the Egyptian aristocracy on seeing Yusuf alayhi salam. All these different stories. It's a story of man and how to eliminate traces of one's ego. This story too has a very delicate point to it in relation to eliminating one's ego. Now here I'll be quoting someone, an Arif by the name, 7th century Arif, Qadi Baydawi Ash'ari. And he has this well-known tafsir where he's written the following. I've just translated it here. He writes, "Verily, whoever wants to know the worst of one's enemies," the worst of one's enemies being the nafsul ammara bisu, the soul that commands to evil. There's only one soul, but a low manifestation of that one I that we all are is when they're at the degree where they are sinning. They haven't grown spiritually very well. That nafsul ammara is one's enemy. Verily, whoever wants to know the worst of one's enemies, that strives with respect to truly killing him or her, the way to acquire this is to slaughter the cow of one's soul, which is tantamount to one's carnal appetite. So in the verse which says, indeed Allah commands you to slaughter a cow, now this is a irfani prescription, it's a protocol of action now, to destroy one's carnal appetites. One must do this, one must destroy this carnal appetite, which is an enemy to oneself, between the time period where one's childish tendencies have ceased, neither young, that cow should be neither young, and one has yet to acquire weakness as a result of old age, nor old. Remember the verse, La faridun wa la bikrun awanun bayna dhalik. Neither old nor young, of a middle age. So the childish tendencies have ceased, and that weakness as a result of old age. Because not that it's impossible for a child to grow spiritually, or for an old man, but it's very difficult. It's that middle period where one's potential is most. But even children, even those, the elderly, there's no limitations. So neither young nor old, and that is when one is beautiful and attractive, during that middle period, of a bright hue, pleasing to the onlookers. During this period, Baydawi says, one does not debase oneself by seeking the worldly life, and one is free from worldly contaminations and is not polluted by its vices. That's the aim. And it's in this middle period where this can be acquired most. Not broken to till the earth or to water the tillage. They haven't polluted themselves with the worldly contaminations yet. They're sound, without blemish. And subsequently, therefore, one acquires a prosperous life if one maintains this and discloses that which he sees and is revealed to him and eliminates all conflicts between one's intellect and imagination. Okay, so that was just, I wanted to finish last night with that bit, but we didn't have time. Okay, returning to Raj'at, inshallah today we'll finish the theological position of those who believe that after the coming of the Mahdi there'll be people, imams, or the purely righteous and the purely evil, who will return in the physical form. We've discussed it in the last 3 nights. Tonight we'll finish off inshallah, and tomorrow we'll enter another perspective of Raj'at, the Mithali perspective which the Urafa have. Here, there's a scholar who's passed away now. He was martyred around 15 years ago, an Iraqi scholar, and I'll be using one of his books. The book is called Tarikh Ma Ba'da Az-Zuhur, the history of after the coming of the Mahdi. His name is Muhammad Sadiq As-Sadr, not Shahid Muhammad Baqir Asad. This is another Shahid. And actually he was one of the students of Shahid Sadr, this Muhammad Sadiq As-Sadr. And it's well known that he was one of the golden 3 students of Shahid Sadr. Shahid Sadr is known to have 3 he had many good students, but these 3 in particular were very important. One of them who is a manager today, is Kazim Ha'iri, Ayatollah Kazim Ha'iri, who's residing in Iran at the moment. Another is Ayatollah Sayyid Mahmoud Hashemi Shahrudi, who used to be the head of the judiciary in Iran. And the third, who isn't with us and was martyred 15 years ago, was Muhammad As-Sadr. As I said a few nights ago, I haven't encountered a book as analytical as this book in relation to what happens after the coming of the Mahdi. The way he's analysed it really was unique, at least for me. And I'm going to go through some of the important points that he's mentioning. I think this part, it's in chapter 3, it's in volume 3, it's 4 very thick volumes, and it's in Arabic. I don't think it's translated into any other language, but it's in volume 3, from page 530 onwards. He says leadership after the Mahdi can take one of 2 forms. Either leadership after the Mahdi, either it will take the form of Raj'at, the physical returning of the Imams, or leadership after the Mahdi can entail or involve only the governance of a select righteous few. That these righteous people will come and they will govern. Not that the Imams will return in physical form. And it's going to go through these 2. Because he is one of the people who doesn't accept Raj'at in the physical form. He rejects it. He supports the idea mainly that after the Mahdi there'll be righteous people who will be ruling, not that the Imams will return in the physical form. These 2 positions, I want to explain what he says. In relation to Raj'at first, the returning in physical form of the Imams, he says that Raj'at has many different definitions attached to it. One is a return of a dead people to the physical world, those who are very righteous and very evil. Also, another definition of Raj'at, which need not be contradictory to the first one, is the return of the Imams, but with a different order. The order differs when they return. After the coming of the Mahdi, when the Imams come, the order in which they come isn't the same order which they came 1,400 years ago. And the periods that they will rule isn't the same periods that they lived when they were alive here. And also, there are traditions that all the Imams will return, but in the reverse order. So they'll all return, starting from the 11th Imam, Imam Hassan al-Askari, then Imam Hadi, Imam Jawad, alayhimu salam, and so on and so forth, until they reach Amirul Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, who is the Dubbatan min al-Ard, and then after Ali's death, after a period of 40 days, then physical Qiyamah will result. These are three different forms of Raj'at that you can extrapolate from the traditions. Now, I want to just go through, he mentions then a set of traditions now, that those who are adherents to the physical return, they use. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, أول من تنشق الأرض عنه ويرجع إلى الدنيا الحسين ibn Ali. The first person who will come out from earth and return to the physical world is Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And in some traditions it says hatta fayamliku, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam will rule until hatta taqa hajibah ala aynay min al-kibar. Imam Hussein alayhi salam will rule when he returns for such a period of time until the hair of his eyebrows covers his two eyes. Out of agedness, he would rule for so long that the eyebrows will cover the eyes for that long. This is one tradition. Another tradition, a companion says, قال لي ما لا أشك فيه يعني أبا جعفر أن رسول الله وعليا سيرجعان. Verily, someone to whom I have no doubt whatsoever, I mean his words are hujjat to me, or proof for me, they said to me, and that is Imam Baqir, said that the Holy Messenger and Amirul Mu'mineen will return. That's another tradition. Another tradition from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, ليس أحد من المؤمنين قتل إلا سيرجع حتى يموت ولا أحد من المؤمنين مات إلا سيرجع حتى يقتل. He says, every believer who got killed in this world will return in the future until he then dies. So he'll be revived and he'll live until he dies. And every believer who died in this world will return until he becomes killed. Those two returnings are reviving of the dead. And it continues, فَلَمْ يَبْعَثُ اللَّهُ نَبِيًّا وَلَا رَسُولًا إِلَّا رَدَّهُمْ جَمِيعًا إِلَى الدُّنْيَا حتى يقاتلوا بين يدي علي ibn Abi Talib Amirul Mu'mineen. And verily Allah will resurrect all the prophets, all the messengers, until they start fight back to this earth for them to fight in the presence of Amirul Mu'mineen. So here all the prophets and messengers also will be revived, a bodily return. Yesterday we went through the traditions that said whatever happened to Bani Israel will happen dot to dot in this ummah of our Prophet. In another tradition, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam has said, إِذَا آنَ قِيَامُ الْقَائِمِ, when the coming of the upriser, the Mahdi, comes, مَتَرَ النَّاسِ جَمَادِيَ الْآخِرَةِ, it will rain upon the people during the whole of Jamad al-Thani, which is the 6th month in the Islamic calendar. وَأَشْرَةَ أَيَّامٍ مِّن رَجَبٍ, this is after the coming of the Mahdi, and the first 10 days of the month of Raj'at, the 7th month of the lunar calendar. لَمْ تَرَ الْخَلَائِقَ مِثْلَهُ, the rain will be such that creation has never seen such a rain. And at that time, فَيَنْبُتُ, Allah will make grow, bihi, by means of that raining, لُهُومَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَأَبْدَانَهُمْ فِي قُبُورِهِمْ, Allah will make grow the flesh of the mu'mineen and their bodies that are in the graves. He'll make them grow, meaning He'll revive the dead. وَكَأَنِّي, and it's as if I, Imam Sadiq saying this, أَنظُرُ إِلَيْهِمْ مُقْبِلِينَ مِنْ قِبَلِ جَهِينَ, and it's as if I'm seeing them coming from Jahina. I wasn't sure what Jahina here meant. Maybe it's the name of a place. I couldn't find the meaning for that. يَنْقُضُونَ شُعُورَهُمْ مِنَ التُّرَابِ, and when they get revived, they are clearing the dust from their hair. After all these years being buried, now they're coming alive. This is also another tradition. Now here, I'll just stop for 1 minute here. Something happened last night. I'm not sure if the brother who asked the question is still here, the one about the 4 birds. He's not here? No. That brother had a good point. Last night when I was thinking about it, he mentioned something incredible. Well, he didn't say it directly, but on thinking about it, it did solve a dilemma. Because if you recall the story of the 4 birds, which we were speaking about, if the bodies of the 4 birds and Ibrahim alayhi salam were totally decomposed, okay, they have a spirit. Now they've been grinded, the spirit is still there, the spirit of the birds. If you were to create or revive those birds again, well, they're all flesh now, it's all earth. To create birds again, that creation of birds, it has to go through its stages. And one of those stages is ensoulment. And if you recall, Imam Khomeini was one of the very few people who said here, if you want to use that story in the physical context, you would have to say those birds which are revived can't be the same birds as the original birds. Because it's a new soul now. When you create a bird from earth, albeit instantaneously, but it has to go through the stages. But with miracles, instead of going from A to B to C to D to E to F to Z, in miracles, it goes through all those stages, but in an instant. But it has to go through the stages. One of the stages is ensoulment. So now you have 2 spirits. So this new bird can't be the same bird, because the spirit of the previous bird is still there. Imam Khomeini has this. Therefore he said, he believed this was a vision of Ibrahim. But then, one way you can justify this, which I had never been able to justify, and that's why I always accepted Imam's position. But one way you can justify this physical scenario, all of it, is that we have traditions that Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he grinded the fleshes of the birds, he kept the head and necks to himself. So he called upon the flesh, and they all came each to the corresponding head and neck. If the head and neck was preserved, this was the point, the brain is preserved. it doesn't matter that the rest of the body gets connected. If the brain is preserved, when the rest of the body, like in organ transplantations, is connected one to the other, it's the same bird again. It's a very delicate point, this. For example, my name is Farrokh, a seminary student. If I was to change my, have an organ, to donate their heart, I become ill, they give me I receive an organ donation, the heart, I'm still Farrokh. Even if 2 hands of mine, one day if we have arm transplants, and then my 2 hands are cut off, 2 hands are put onto me, I'm still Farrokh. If you say, what's your name? They'll say Farrokh. If my legs are, changed, my kidneys, spleen, lungs, you say, what's your name? I'll say Farrokh. But if someone with the name of Muhammad X, for example, if his brain is put into my body, let's say my brain is now destroyed, his brain is put into my body, and then they say to me, what's your name? I would say Muhammad X. There's no Farrokh anymore. The soul doesn't exist in the brain, but this relationship between the soul and body, by body we mean the brain. So here in this story, the brains were intact. So there's no problem philosophically to say it were the same birds. So that was something, sorry, just in this tradition, I just had to mention that too. Okay. Now, Allama Majlisi says that we have over 600 traditions on Raj'at. We've just mentioned a few of them. And he says there is tawatur in relation to Raj'at. And we explain what tawatur is. I don't want to keep on explaining it, otherwise we won't finish. Allama Tabatabai accepted it. He said there is tawatur in meaning. With all those traditions, the meaning of Raj'at can be extrapolated without doubt. One has certitude. But only the principle of Raj'at can be established. The general principle, not the particularities. There's no tawatur there. There's no yaqeen there. Because those 600 traditions are all solitary reports. And we said solitary reports per se cannot lead to it being a source of extrapolating Islamic doctrine. In fiqh it can, not in aqaid. Muhammad as-Sadr says that the same as Allama. He says, at the very best, we have to understand that in these 600 traditions that we have, there are so many different understandings of Raj'at in these 600 traditions that it's impossible to say this particular form of Raj'at can be proved beyond doubt. It's impossible. And even in relation to the tawatur in meaning, it's only that very general, common denominational meaning of Raj'at which can be extrapolated, and that's the returning of a few dead people before Qiyamah. The reviving of dead people. Only that much can be extrapolated with surety. Then he gives 10 different classes of meanings which can be extrapolated of Raj'at. He says in some traditions it says the very righteous will return and the very evil will return. In some traditions it says all the mu'mineen will return. In some traditions it says all the prophets will return. You see, different meanings here. In some traditions it says only Rasulullah will return. In some traditions it says only Amirul Mu'mineen will return. Some traditions says Hussein ibn Ali will return. In some traditions a group of every nation will return. In some traditions a group of believers will return. In some traditions some imams will return. And in some traditions all the imams in a particular order will return. You see, you can't choose one particular form and then say with certitude that this is what will happen. You can't get that from the traditions. You can't extrapolate that with certitude. none of these individual classes of Raj'at or mutawatir, neither word-wise nor meaning-wise. And that's because the traditions are either weak or they're solitary reports. As Muhammad Sadr says, لا تثبت بخبر الواحد, you can't prove by means of solitary reports. وإن كان صحيحا ومتعددا ما لم يبلغ حتى التواتر. Even if there's sahih traditions, even if there are numerous solitary accurate traditions, you can't accept them as a source of extrapolating Islamic doctrine until they reach the threshold of tawatur. And that's not the case here. But that common denominational meaning, which has tawatur in meaning, is that some deceased people will return to the physical world in the physical form before Qiyamah. That's all we can extrapolate. That's it. And this much, which we can extrapolate with yaqeen, is of no use to those who believe in Raj'at, because they want to say the Raj'at of the Imams, and the Imams will come and rule. Well, this Raj'at of the Imams, that can't be established. There's no clear proof, according to Muhammad Sadr. Except for one set of traditions which Muhammad Sadr does accept. And that is Amirul Mu'mineen will return. That, he says, we do have proof and evidence for. Why? True, they're solitary reports, they're solitary traditions, but these solitary traditions are backed by verses of the Quran that dabbatan min al-ard. And that annexation can lead to yaqeen. That's the only form of Raj'at he is ready to accept. Otherwise, he doesn't accept the concept. From a purely traditions-based point of view, one needs proof, one needs evidence. It's not there. Just one point, those traditions which say that all the Imams will return in the reversing order, starting with the 11th Imam first, and the 10th Imam will come, all after the coming of the Mahdi. He says this is the most popular view. Maybe he meant in Iraq. Okay, I don't think that's the popular view elsewhere. He said this is the popular view, and this doesn't even have any tradition which is even solitary. They're all weak, they're not authentic. He uses that argument there. Okay. Now, then he attacks those who use the Quran and different verses of the Quran, which we mentioned that the theologians use to support Raj'at. He brings those verses and say why they don't support Raj'at. The first was the verse where, chapter 40, verse 11, رَبَّنَا أَمَتَّنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ وَأَحْيَيْتَنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ. Remember, the evil atheists will say when they're in hell, oh Allah, you made us die twice and you revived us twice. If you recall, they said the first death was in this world, so they were alive. The first death which came was when they were in this physical world. The first life they were granted was Raj'at. The second death is that death after Raj'at, and the second life was Qiyamah. That was how theologians wanted to support Raj'at. And there was a tradition, albeit solitary, that said this verse is in relation to Raj'at. Here, Muhammad said, in reply, he says, this would only be true if there are traditions which point to this fact. But there aren't any, and those which exist are solitary and you can't use them as proof. This is Islamic aqa'id now. Don't think that the aqa'id we have It's just based on willy-nilly things. It has to go through a set protocol of procedure. If it goes through the right stages, then it becomes our aqaid. Just because we have one tradition, albeit accurate, albeit authentic, albeit related from a number of different sources, that doesn't count as proof yet. So he says we don't have that proof here. That's one thing. Second of all, this verse that you believe is in relation to Raj'at, no. If you would be able to confine it to Raj'at, that would be okay. But this verse has many other explanations, other possibilities. You chose Raj'at. We don't agree. There are many other ways we can explain the same story. Those two deaths and those two revivals, you explained it in a way so that Raj'at would fit your description. But you can use other ways. Why do you explain it in that manner? And since there are other possibilities, you can't conclude that this verse is indicating Raj'at. Because the prima facie meaning, the zuhur of the verse, can be applicable to other alternatives other than Raj'at. Then he comes and says these are other possibilities that you can interpret this verse. The first life is when the embryo was lifeless. That's the first death. The first life would be when you're brought into this world. The second death is death in this world, and the second life is in Qiyamah. Although Allama Tabatabai didn't accept that, if you recall, because the first death can only qualify in relation to something which is already alive. It doesn't qualify in relation to an embryo that is lifeless. The difference between imata and amwat, we went through that. Or another way Muhammad says, it can mean the life and death in this world and life and death in the realm of the grave. There's another way you can explain it, where there's life in Barzakh and there's death in Barzakh. For one, death in Barzakh being that transitory period before one enters Qiyamah. This also, one can explain it like that. Anyway, and he goes through a number of different ways and says all these different ways of explaining it are just as good as your explanation when you want to bring Raj'at into the picture. There's no need. There's no need just to abide by Raj'at or stick to that alternative. There are many other alternatives. And he says some of those alternatives are just as good as the prima facie meaning of Raj'at that you want to take from it. Allama Tabatabai goes through this verse, and when he does, he never brings Raj'at into this picture. He says that some people say that the first death is one's death on the last day on earth, and before that, therefore, one was alive for this death to qualify. The first life was when one is in Barzakh. The second death is one's end in Barzakh, and the second life is in Qiyamah. Then he says the kuffar, though, said, Rabbana amattana thnatain. You made us die twice. Wa ahyaytana thnatain. The kuffar didn't say, Rabbana amattana thnatain. You made us die twice. Wa ahyaytana thalatha. 3 times. You made us live 3 times. Because with the first death in this world, it's preceded by a human being that is alive. Why didn't the kuffar mention that part, that period of time? He says because in this verse then it says, we admit our sins, the evil atheists say. You made us live twice, you made us die twice, Allah. Now we admit our sins. Is there any way out? Allah is saying, those 2 revivals, those two making them dead, all of them led to their yaqeen in relation to ma'ad. Led to their yaqeen in relation to ma'ad. So the two forms of dying and the two forms of revival have to be such that it led to their yaqeen. If you just bear with me here. That's why they didn't say you made us, you revived us 3 times. They didn't mention that first being alive, because when they were alive in this world, they didn't have yaqeen of ma'ad. It was with those two being put to death and those two revivals, those 4 periods led to their yaqeen of ma'ad. Then they said, we admit our sins, is there any way out? This is what Alom is saying. That's a very delicate point, because now those theologians which use Raj'at, their position becomes cancelled. Why? Because they believed that the first death was in this world. The first being put to life, the first revival, was in Raj'at, and then the second death was in Raj'at too, and then the second revival was in Qiyamat. Well, that period of time in Raj'at, when these people return, they still don't accept, the evil atheists, they don't accept ma'ad. They're still in doubt. But you have to create 2 periods of death, 2 periods of revival, that all of them lead to one's yaqeen of ma'ad. Whereas here, that period of their first revival and their second death, which is in relation to this physical world and is Raj'at, that still didn't lead to their yaqeen in relation to ma'ad. Inshallah, I have been able to convey it, but it's a delicate point here. So Allah says, is that last day on earth is the first death. The first life is in Barzakh. The second death is the end of Barzakh, and the second life is in Qiyamah. Okay. So that's another point. Another verse which the theologians used was وَيَوْمَ نَحْشُرُ مِنْ كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ فَوْجًا. We shall resurrect from every nation a group of people مِمَّنْ يُكَذِّبُ بِآيَاتِنَا فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ. A group of people will be resurrected, those who denied our signs, and they shall be held in check. You know, like in the military when they hold the soldiers in check, these people. Here the theologians, if you recall, said, look, this is saying the day that a group of every nation will be resurrected and shall be held in check. In Qiyamah, in chapter 18, verse 47, وَلَمْ نُغَادِرْ مِنْهَا أَحَدًا. That's Qiyamah, they said. Because no one will be missed out. Everyone will be resurrected. But this verse, only a group from every nation will be resurrected, and they shall be held in check. That is Raj'at, they said. And here too we have a tradition. But the tradition is a solitary report. Khabar wahid. Can't be used alone to say it's proof. You can't use that alone. Here Muhammad Sa'd very delicately says, first of all, the tradition is solitary. You would need much more if you want to use this verse alone. And that, if you recall, there was a tradition where Imam Sadiq came and said, no, this is Raj'at. That which is Qiyamat is this verse, which says no one will be missed out. But here it's a group from every nation. The first point is it's a solitary report. You can't make too much into it. The verse on its own doesn't indicate Raj'at alone. Other meanings too can be extrapolated from it. And since other meanings too can be extrapolated from it, it loses its power here. You can't say this is only Raj'at. There are other possibilities. And those other possibilities may even be stronger. Their prima facie meaning may even be stronger. What is that other possibility? He says it's a gradual resurrection. He says this, وَمِن كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَفْوَاجًا مِن كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ فَوْجًا, from every group. Yet this is also Qiyamah, but it's referring to a gradual form of Qiyamah, where they will come in groups. It doesn't have to mean that here people will be missed out. No, everyone will be included, but they will come in groups. They shall be held in check, these people who denied the signs. It doesn't speak out the good people. There's no need to, suddenly reject this as being Qiyamah. Then he says there are two forms of Qiyamah in the Quran: the instantaneous resurrection and the gradual Hashr Tadriji. He says in the instantaneous resurrection, all at once, all people will be judged from the beginning to the end. All the people from the beginning to the end, all of them, in an instant they will be judged. This is one understanding from the Quran. I'm not saying the Quran is saying this. There are two understandings of resurrection in the Quran. Some people say from the very beginning of time to the end, all the people instantaneously will be resurrected and judged. And he says this is a common people's perception. And then when he says this, he says this isn't the resurrection that one understands from the Quran. He says the Quran never indicates this understanding that the people have. But he doesn't continue with this. He said now is not the time to open this up. He says, لَسْنَا الْآنَ فِي سَدَدِهَا. I don't want to enter this debate here now. I'm not up to it here. But he doesn't accept it. He doesn't accept that the Quran indicates this kind of resurrection, that for everyone from the beginning to the end. And it's certainly not the position that the Urafa take either. Everyone has their own Qiyamah, spiritual Qiyamah. People are in heaven and hell now. And this will always be. People after our cycle, the cycle of Adam, there'll be other people, and they will have their Qiyamah, and so on and so forth. This thing of everyone, being waiting for a particular day, then they all be spiritually judged. No, that's not something which the Quran indicates. But in relation to the gradual resurrection, yes. Here we see page 532, he says, Al-Hashr Tadriji Jaylan ba'da jaylin أو دينا بعد دين أو مجموعة بعدد معين بعد مجموعة وهكذا وحتى يتم حساب الدفعة الأولى تحشر الدفعة الثانية وهكذا. Yes, people after people will be resurrected. Religion after religion. Groups after groups. And then one group will be resurrected, followed by a second resurrection of other group. No one will be missed out. There's no need to automatically think that people will be missed out from this verse. And then in other verses of the Quran, وَيُحْشَرُ أَعْدَاءُ اللَّهِ يَوْمَ يُحْشَرُ أَعْدَاءُ اللَّهِ إِلَى النَّارِ فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ. The day when the enemies of Allah will be resurrected towards hell, and they shall be held in check. See, that's another verse of the Quran, chapter 41, verse 19. There, that's Qiyamah too. What's similar to this verse? It says in this verse, where the enemies of Allah, the day they will be resurrected towards hell, and they shall be held in check. He accepts that's Qiyamah, but Allah doesn't believe that this verse, that a group from every nation will be resurrected and they shall be held. He didn't believe that's Qiyamah. He didn't say it's Raj'at. He said it's not explicit. We don't know. It can be interpreted differently. He does say that. But he says it's before Qiyamah. So then we say, okay, so what will you say, Allah, concerning the verse which says, يُحْشَرُ أَعْدَاءُ اللَّهِ إِلَى النَّارِ فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ. He says, look, there we have إِلَى النَّارِ. the objective, the destination, the ultimate destination is mentioned. And that shows its qiyamat, where in the previous verse it wasn't mentioned. Although it's far from me to criticize Allama, please, I don't want anyone to think that. But Muhammad Sa'd doesn't accept that. And you know, that doesn't look as very strong evidence from Allama, maybe. Because you can say that this verse is clarifying that verse. It's a mubayyin in relation to the other verse. We would need further proof to suggest that that's not Qiyamat. Okay, that's another one. Then another verse which the theologians use and Muhammad Sa'd is now refuting, وَإِذَا وَقَعَ الْقَوْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَخْرَجْنَا دَبَّةً مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. If you recall the verse, chapter 27, verse 82, when the word reaches them, we shall bring forth a creature from earth who will speak to them, saying that verily you rejected our signs, and so on and so forth. This was another. There was a tradition, we said, that the Holy Prophet said, this is Dabbatun min al-Arad, this is Amirul Mu'mineen. It's a title specific to Amirul Mu'mineen. And the Holy Prophet said, there'll be a time, your Ali, when the end of time comes, Allah will bring you forth in the best image. Now, when we go to the position of the Urafa, this all changes suddenly, but we'll come to that later. Here, this is another verse which the theologians use to support Raj'at. Now, this Raj'at is proved via this verse in two ways. First of all, they say, the theologians, that the creature will exit or come out during the time of Raj'at, and it will come out and establish its duty in relation to the people. They say this happens in the time of Raj'at. Muhammad Sa'd says this isn't correct because the verse only speaks about, the verse alone, when you look at the verse purely from the verse's point of view, makes no mention of Raj'at. It just makes mention of the bringing forth of this creature from earth. There's no indication of Raj'at in the verse. It's the tradition which helps out here. And also, he says that if you want to speak of this being a revival and happening at a time and you want to call it Raj'at, the verse only speaks of the return and revival of this one creature from earth. Okay? Now you say, since it can happen to one, why can't it happen to others? Fair enough, but you would need proof for that. Muhammad Sa'd is saying it's not impossible, and he accepts that this Dabbatun min al-Ard is Amirul Mu'mineen. He says these are solitary traditions, but with this backing, it's no problem. Amirul Mu'mineen will return. Here the Quran is supporting this idea, this solitary tradition, leading to one's yaqeen, and he accepts this form of Raj'at. But he's saying just because, even if we accept this form as a bare minimum, it doesn't mean that you can give the green light to the return of others. Each needs their own proof. But in relation to Amirul Mu'mineen, he's willing